Japanese engineers never replace a water heater. And usually, right beside it, there's another promise. Some tiny secret, some cheap trick, some magical $3 method that somehow keeps a water heater alive forever, while everyone else keeps throwing theirs away. It's a great headline. It's also not true. I dug into Japanese manufacturer guidance, Japanese safety recommendations, U.S. Department of Energy advice, and major water heater manuals, and the first thing that became obvious was this: Japan absolutely does replace water heaters. In fact, major Japanese manufacturers openly say these systems age, wear out, and often need inspection or replacement at around the 10-year mark. So the headline is wrong. But here's the part that makes this interesting. Even though the headline is wrong, the reason people believe it points to something real. There actually is a useful lesson hiding underneath all that exaggeration. Because Japan didn't discover an immortal water heater, what Japan did do was build a very different relationship with hot water systems, different designs, different expectations, different maintenance habits. And once you understand that, you start to see why so many homeowners in America end up treating water heaters like disposable mystery boxes that live in the garage or basement until one day the floor gets wet. That is the real story. And honestly, it matters more than the myth. Because water heaters are one of those appliances almost nobody thinks about until the worst possible moment. They sit there quietly for years, totally ignored, and then one day they stop working, start leaking, or suddenly become an emergency. And once it's an emergency, you're no longer making a smart decision, you're making a rushed one. That's why these myths spread so easily. People want to believe somebody somewhere figured out the secret to avoiding that whole cycle. They want to believe there's a hidden trick the average homeowner was never told. And to be fair, there is a piece of that feeling that's justified, because there really are maintenance basics that many homeowners never learn until it's too late. But the truth is not, never replace your water heater. The truth is a lot more practical than that. The first thing to understand is that a lot of this comparison is not really Japan versus America. It's more like tankless versus storage tank. That's the center of the whole story. For decades, Japanese companies built deep expertise around compact gas hot water systems, especially instantaneous or tankless designs. That matters because a tankless unit does not depend on storing a large volume of heated water inside a metal tank all day long. And that one design difference changes everything. A conventional storage water heater has a tough life. It sits there year after year holding hot water in a metal tank while minerals settle, corrosion tries to take over, and heat cycles keep stressing the system. It works, it's common, and it can be perfectly fine for a lot of homes, but its biggest weakness is built into the design itself. The tank is always in a long war against time, water, heat, and corrosion. Eventually, that war usually ends the same way. The tank loses. And once the actual tank shell starts leaking, you're usually not talking about a cheap fix anymore. You're at the point where replacement becomes the honest answer. Tankless systems have their own problems, of course. They are not magical. They still need maintenance. They still have sensors, burners, controls, heat exchangers, and parts that wear out. But they avoid one major long-term failure point: the giant stored tank of hot water slowly corroding from the inside. That's one of the big reasons tankless units often last longer than conventional tank heaters. Not because they're immortal, not because one country discovered a miracle. They just start with a different architecture, and that architecture changes the way the system ages. So when people look at Japan and say, "How are they doing this?" what they are often really seeing is the effect of a different design philosophy, not a secret ritual, not a hidden fluid, not some mysterious $3 part that nobody in America wants to tell you about. A different system. And that brings us to the second part of the story: maintenance. Because this is where the myth gets just enough truth to become dangerous. If you have a tank-type water heater, one of the most important components in that entire system is something many homeowners have never even heard of: the anode rod. And if you've never heard of it, you're not alone. The anode rod is basically the sacrificial bodyguard of the tank. Its entire purpose is to corrode first, so the inside of the tank doesn't have to. That's its job. It gives itself up to protect the water heater. That sounds simple, but it's actually a huge deal, because a lot of homeowners treat their water heater like a sealed box. They don't know what's inside it, they don't know what part wears out first, and they don't know there's a component whose whole job is to slow the destruction of the tank itself. Manufacturers absolutely know this. Manuals talk about it. Service guidance talks about it. But for the average homeowner, that information often never becomes real until the heater is already old, rusty, and halfway toward failure. And that's why these viral claims hit such a nerve. because when people learn that there's a relatively simple maintenance item connected to the lifespan of the heater, they immediately feel like they were kept in the dark. Now, to be clear, this is not some magical universal fix. Replacing or inspecting an anode rod is not the same thing as making a water heater last forever. It mainly applies to tank-style systems, and the actual benefit depends on water quality, the age of the unit, how much corrosion has already happened, and whether the tank is still structurally sound. But the principle is real. Small maintenance can matter a lot, and the anode rod is only part of it. The next big issue is sediment. Over time, especially in homes with hard water or mineral-heavy water, sediment can build up in the bottom of a tank water heater. That buildup can reduce efficiency, create strange noises, stress the system, and make the heater work harder than it should. A lot of homeowners don't notice it happening because it builds slowly, but that doesn't mean it isn't doing damage. That's why flushing a tank water heater is a real maintenance step. It's not exciting. It's not viral. It's not the kind of thing people build clickbait around, but it matters. And then there's temperature. This is another place where the real answer is boring in the best possible way. A lot of people set water heaters hotter than they actually need, and in many cases, a more sensible temperature setting helps reduce scald risk while also being easier on the system over time. Again, not a miracle. Just one more way to stop forcing the heater to live a harder life than necessary. So if you look at the reality instead of the headline, the picture becomes pretty clear. Japan did not create immortal water heaters. What Japan leaned into was better system design, stronger engineering specialization, and a culture that tends to treat hot water equipment more like a serious appliance category and less like an invisible utility box. Meanwhile, in many American homes, the water heater is treated like a forgotten object that only becomes interesting after years of complete neglect. And that difference changes everything. Because once neglect becomes normal, replacement starts to feel normal too. And that's the emotional engine behind the whole myth. People look at a heater failing after years of zero attention, then they hear about countries using different systems or better maintenance, and suddenly it feels like there must be some hidden knowledge that was kept from them. But the hidden knowledge is not mystical. It's just unglamorous, a sacrificial rod protecting the tank, periodic flushing, paying attention to mineral buildup, understanding whether you have a tank or a tankless unit, knowing that different systems have different failure paths. That's the real knowledge. And once you get that, you also need to understand the limit of maintenance, because this is where people can go wrong in the other direction. As soon as someone learns about anode rods, flushing, or descaling, there's a temptation to think every water heater can be saved if you just find the right trick. That's not true either. Maintenance is not resurrection. Maintenance helps before failure becomes structural. It helps when the system is still healthy enough to benefit from it. It helps when you're slowing damage, not pretending damage doesn't exist. If the actual tank is leaking, you are usually no longer in maintenance territory. You're at the end of the story. If the unit is old, heavily corroded, dealing with repeated issues, or hitting the point where parts are harder to get, then you may be looking at a machine that has simply reached the end of practical life. And that is not a sign of weakness or stupidity or some failure to discover a secret hack. That's just what appliances do. Even the Japanese manufacturers people love to use in these viral claims openly recognize that reality. Their own guidance acknowledges aging, inspection, and eventual replacement. That alone should tell you the myth has gone too far. And there's one more thing that matters here: safety. This is especially important with gas systems. Once you move beyond basic homeowner awareness and get into combustion issues, venting issues, or anything that touches carbon monoxide risk, this stops being internet hack territory very quickly. That's not the time for fake confidence. That's not the time to act like every problem has a cheap do-it-yourself answer. Some problems are maintenance problems, some are service problems, some are replacement problems, and some are safety problems first. That's why the smartest homeowner mindset is not never replace. It's not always repair. It's not, there must be a trick. The smartest mindset is this: understand what system you have, understand what normally kills it, maintain what can actually be maintained, and replace it when replacement is honestly the right call. That's a much better lesson than the myth, because the myth makes people chase a fantasy. The real lesson makes people more competent. And honestly, that's what most of these viral home maintenance claims are missing. They always want to turn everything into a dramatic reveal. They want one weird trick, one forbidden secret, one tiny part that changes everything. But in real life, longevity usually comes from a chain of boring decisions made at the right time. The right design, the right installation, the right maintenance, the right settings, and the right judgment about when something is worth saving and when it isn't. That's true for water heaters. It's true for cars. It's true for tools. It's true for almost every machine people own. So if you want the clean, practical version of this whole topic, here it is. Japan does not never replace water heaters. What Japan shows more clearly is that the lifespan of a hot water system depends heavily on design choices and maintenance expectations. A tankless system often ages differently from a storage tank. A maintained system often lasts differently from a neglected one, and many homeowners are never taught enough about their water heater to know the difference until the emergency has already started. That's the real frustration. Not that a secret exists, but that basic useful knowledge often never reaches normal people in a way that sticks. And that is why the myth feels believable even when it's false. Because underneath the fake claim is a real experience a lot of homeowners recognize, the feeling that they should have known more about this machine before it failed. So the best takeaway is not to hunt for a miracle. It's to go home and ask a few better questions. What kind of water heater do you actually have? How old is it? If it's a tank system, has anyone ever checked the anode rod? Has it ever been flushed? If it's tankless, has it ever been descaled? Is your temperature set reasonably? Are you maintaining a healthy appliance, or just waiting for a dying one to surprise you? Those questions are worth more than any clickbait promise. Because once you know the system, the mystery disappears. And when the mystery disappears, you stop being the kind of homeowner who only learns about a water heater after it fails. So no, Japanese engineers did not discover a way to never replace a water heater, but they do point us toward a smarter way of thinking about one, not as a disposable metal box, not as a magical machine, but as a system with strengths, weaknesses, and a lifespan that can often be improved if you understand it early enough. That's the real lesson. And honestly, it's better than the myth, because myths get clicks. Understanding saves money.